The last time I saw such long queues was when the last Harry Potter book came out. The frenzy, the fanfare, and the fervor. And it sounds a bit crazy to say this, but I saw it once again a week ago when the Apple iPhone 16 Pro launched in India. As an Android user, I genuinely don't get the hype, but clearly a lot of people do. Which is obviously why Apple's been doing the kind of business it's been doing in India. Not just business, Apple's operations in India are projected to generate up to 6 lakh jobs by the end of this financial year. The Indian workforce of Apple is expected to include 2 lakh direct positions by March next year, with women making up to 70% of these roles. That's, as Donald Trump would say, huge. But where does India rank when it comes to Apple's largest markets? How big is the premium smartphone category in India? What is the kind of traction that allied products like wearables and hearables enjoy in the country? What does Apple's supply chain look like? How dependent is Apple on its China manufacturing base? Is India an attractive alternative to China? What is the current level of value addition done in India? How much is it projected to increase? Who are these suppliers? Find out all of this and more as we speak to 2 ace Apple analysts. It's Friday, September 27th. I'm your host, Diya Rekhi, and you were listening to Apple Ripe for Picking only on the Morning Brief from the Economic Times. Let me take you back to 2007. It was the year that Apple designed its first smartphone, where the device's most revolutionary element was its touch-sensitive multi-sensor interface. Now, I know that in today's times, imagining a world without a touchscreen seems quite unthinkable. But Apple really was among the pioneers of having such a tactile physical experience and provided users with a real sensory delight, with them being able to do things like shrink photos by pinching or flip through stuff with a flicking motion. All of which are such an integral part of the average smartphone experience today. But Apple is far from average. It's premium and proud. And nothing proves that more than its annual launches, which are keenly followed by tech junkies, but also those who are waiting for the prices of the older models to drop so that they can have iPhone bragging rights without burning a hole in their pocket. We've spoken a lot about the phone, but it's equally important to understand the size of the market that it caters to. And for that, I turn to Ekta Mittal to give us the dope on how big the market really is in India for Apple. Listen in. Thank you so much, Ekta, for joining us on the Morning Brief. It's a pleasure to have you. And I want to begin by asking you about this hype around the Apple iPhone. Is this hype real?
For Apple in India, the hype is definitely real. So the growth trajectory that we personally see is like a strong hockey stick growth pattern. If we move back to 2008, when Apple had just launched in India, for nearly a decade, the market penetration was really low. However, over the period of time since COVID, it has increased and the trend is likely to set in now. So there are a couple of factors that has worked in favor of Apple. So firstly, there is an increased trend of premiumization of smartphones. So basically, due to COVID, lockdowns and restrictions, there has been a significant increase in the disposable income and purchasing power of the Indian consumers. And because of limited movement outside the home for entertainment needs, for travel, there was an enormous corpus that people had, and they preferred to spend that money on the aspirational devices. Secondly, there has been a strong push of third and fourth generation smartphone users, wherein they have already used the entry-level smartphones, upgraded themselves to the mid-level smartphones, and they are now seeking to upgrade to a more premium offering with new features and new form factors. And lastly, there has been a lot of market buzz around the easy EMI financing schemes since the last 5 years, cashback offers, and trade-in schemes, along with the discounting of N-1 models during the Flipkart and the Amazon Big Billion Day sales. So even right now, starting 26th of September, with the sales setting in, we expect that the prices of the iPhone 15 is likely to drop to as low as around 50,000 INR. So that is where we see a lot of market buzz happening from a consumer demand perspective.
Coming to Apple's largest markets, where does India really fit in the mix?
For India, India has not been a key market for Apple until 2021. It is when the government's initiative of the production linked incentive scheme launched in 2020, it helped to position India as a strong brand. Currently, it stands amongst the top 10 markets in India and it has been ramping up its pace over the years.
iPhones are just about as premium as it gets in the smartphone market, but I wanted to understand about this premium smartphone segment in India. What is it like and how large is it right now?
So if we talk about India, India has always been a very price sensitive market. Since about half a decade, the Indian market has been mainly priced in the 100 to 200 mass segment. However, over the years, we've seen that there is a strong uptake in the premium smartphones, wherein as earlier as before 2020, about just 5% of the market was dominated or was captured by the premium smartphone space. And recently, we have seen a strong jump in the market to 10% in 2023. And as per the CCS Insights, we expect the market to increase to about 18% by the end of the fiscal year 2024.
And when we speak of exports, where do things stand right now? How many iPhones are really being exported from India? How much was it earlier? How is this going to be like going forward?
Yeah, as per the ICA report, about 97% of the smartphones are locally assembled in India. And of this, about 30% of the smartphones are expected to be exported by the end of 2024. Talking about Apple, right now, about two-thirds of the smartphones are exported from India. And with the government initiatives, and as Apple increases its expansion facilities in India and moves its a broader production facility, then the market share is likely to increase by about three-fourths of the market in the coming years.
That's interesting. And it ties into what I wanted to ask you as well, because when we speak of deepening its India presence, what really is Apple doing to deepen their retail presence? And would you have any suggestions for what more they can do?
Yeah, so for Apple, the major market has always been the tier one city. But if we talk about India as a retail channel and the presence for India, so this has been a very different market wherein the consumers have evolved over the period of time from purchasing from mom and pop stores and offline retail stores to going to the online experiences. So currently 50% of the market is online and is dominated by Flipkart and Amazon. Quick commerce platforms have also gained traction and are diversifying in the online space. If we talk in terms of the offline, which is again half of the market, so far until the brand has relied on the authorized channel partners to sell its product, and the consumers have actually been missing on the premium in-store experiences. So the game changed last year when Apple launched two of its flagship stores, one in New Delhi and the other in Mumbai, which is something that the consumers have been waiting for all this while. So as per our suggestion, Apple should focus more in terms of increasing footprint in the other metro cities, for example, Bangalore, Pune, and Hyderabad. And likewise, it should also work in terms of enhancing its in-store experiences. Alternatively, discounting smartphones via trade-in value offering through the telcos can also be an attractive value proposition. For example, in the US, Apple is giving iPhone 16 Pro, which is $1,000 smartphone, for free. And the catch is over here is that they lock the consumer for a longer duration for the data plans. So this can turn out to be a lucrative plan for the telco operators to lock in premium Apple users to their networks.
Now, Apple is a prime example of a GVC or a global value chain where the finished product results from manufacturing and assembly in multiple countries, with each step in the process adding value to the final product. The pandemic led to supply chain shocks that really hurt GVCs and forced them to look at diversification, as they found that their manufacturing was heavily centered in China, which at the time had halted production, sending severe supply chain shocks. This was the time that Apple began its diversification away from China and started looking at betting more on India. The company already had suppliers like Foxconn, Pegatron, and Wistron that were operational in the country, and soon added Tata Electronics, which, by the way, is the only Indian supplier to the company. And with Foxconn and Tata Electronics pumping in huge investments to cater to Apple's ever-increasing demands, India is seeing a huge boom in the electronics manufacturing space, one that has a transformational impact. And like I said earlier, suppliers like Foxconn are really stepping on the gas when it comes to their operations in India. Just this week, I had written about how Foxconn is looking to set up a $1 billion display module assembly facility in Tamil Nadu. Now, there are other Chinese players who do this assembly work for brands like Samsung, Xiaomi, Oppo, and Vivo. But what makes this significant is that this will be the first one in India to cater to Apple. There's a lot happening on the manufacturing front, and the government too has been extremely focused on enabling this ecosystem with attractive PLIs. But as India looks to move up the value chain, what really is in store? Listen in as I ask Counterpoint's Tarun Pathak. Thank you so much, Tarun, for joining us on the morning brief. It's a pleasure to have you. I just wanted to, start off by asking you from a pure manufacturing perspective. I wanted to begin by asking you how important diversification away from China has really been for Apple.
It has become very important, and not just from Apple's perspective. If you look at the supply chain, the entire supply chain has actually diversified or planning to diversify, especially post-COVID, because a lot of companies realize that if we are putting everything in one country, there will be a larger risk to it. And then the geopolitical angle as well. The companies have actually realigned their supply chain. They have started to diversify. Apple is one of them. And we have seen that the entire iPhone manufacturing, iPhone is like almost 66% of their revenue, which was almost like 98% assembly in China. That has started diversifying. And now we are almost 5 years down the line. In 2024, we are expecting India is taking almost 13% of that assembly as compared to 1% almost 2018, 2019. And they are doing not just in India, they are doing it in Vietnam, they are doing it in Latin America as well. So it has become very important, especially for a company like Apple that is dependent on suppliers across 43, 44 different countries. And then when you have product categories that runs into billions of dollars, it makes a lot of sense for them to diversify.
But when we speak about diversification from China, I know there are a lot of very specialized suppliers in China. So how realistic really is it for countries like India to catch up to China?
It is. So let us understand how the entire diversification works. So for example, it's not just one company from an Apple supply chain coming and expanding in other countries. You can call it as more like creating an ecosystem of suppliers, because the biggest advantage China has right now, and they always had, is you go to a particular place, you'll get plenty of diverse suppliers within almost like 100 miles of that particular area. So that's the beauty of China. The supply chain is very interconnected, they are accessible, and they have economies of scale. Now, to create that in a new country, you need a lot of things. So one, you need an expert pool of labor. You need a friendly policies on top of it. And at the same time, you need that entire ecosystem, because a company like Apple can't work in silos. The steps that India has taken, that journey has been very fruitful from India's perspective. We are manufacturing almost like 300 million phones annually. And if you look at overall globally, almost like 1.5 billion phones are being made. So India roughly is doing almost 20% of the global phone assembly. But one can debate that even within assembly, there are different levels, things like level 1 assembly, and then just a pure assembly, and then you do certain kind of value additions on top of it. It will take time, but the steps are in the right direction.
You spoke about levels, right? I wanted to ask you what India's current level is.
Let's talk about in terms of local value addition. So for example, if there is a phone, it has, let's say, 300 components. Today, how many components I can source locally, and what is the value of those components that goes into that phone? If cost of making a phone is $100, I can source $15 of those in India right now. I still need to depend 85% on countries like China, predominantly Taiwan, Korea, Japan, and US to a certain extent in terms of technology transfer. But the local validation right now stands at in very few areas. So for example, that was driven by phased manufacturing program. But we started, you have a assembly, then you have low hanging components that are localized here, batteries, chargers, cables, a bit of mechanics, like displays happening with a couple of companies. Then you have camera modules that are being assembled. So that has happened. But from that 15 to 30 to 50% from where China is right now, will need a lot of support from government policies, investments, and creating that ecosystem around where a lot of these suppliers enter India. And then that will be good support for these bigger companies like Apple or Samsung in India.
Coming to what I had spoken to you about recently, which is Foxconn looking to set up this display module assembly unit in Tamil Nadu. How significant is this? Because this is going to be the first for Apple in India, right? And is it really an indication of moving up the value chain?
It is right now, of all the components I spoke in terms of value addition, display was missing, right? And the reason was obviously one of them is duties. A lot of these companies do not find these duties attractive. But the point is, out of a BOM of a phone, display is still a 15% of the BOM. And when we say it's the entire display, you have like glass, touch panel, polarized COGs, FPCs, everything that goes and connects, and then you have cover glass on top of it. So there's the entire value chain of the display that is there. Now the point is, out of the entire value chain, which particular area we need to localize here in India, what we can do. One can always argue that, okay, display fab is one thing, but that will take time and that will need a lot of investment. But in the meanwhile, we need more companies like what CSOT has done or what TXD is doing. At least start with the module assembly, and it will add a local valuation of another 2 to 3%. So your 15% will go to like 17%. Obviously, it will create jobs. It will help a lot of these suppliers to make sure, okay, there is a certain demand that is coming from India as a region, because obviously the biggest advantage India has the huge domestic demand as well as the export opportunity. So that is big. Talking about Apple, they are exporting more than what they are selling in India from the entire manufacturing lot they are doing in India. So that's an opportunity. I think that will give volume for a lot of these players who are planning to set up. That will obviously help and position India as an alternative manufacturing destination for a lot of these suppliers.
Could you give us a sense of what the current supplier ecosystem in India looks like and why it's important for such ecosystems to have anchor companies?
So we have seen these companies who are largely into assembling. Foxconn is a big name, everyone knows it. Tata's has entered. So that was a big learning curve for India. So you need an anchor company. If you go back in the history and look how the entire semiconductor ecosystem is set up in these nations, it is just because of the steps taken by a couple of companies and then how they scaled it up. So for example, when it comes to Japan, it was mostly Panasonic, Toshiba's of the world, Sharp, at that time, LG and Samsung in Korea. And that's why we have seen a lot of interest from Indian conglomerates to enter into this particular segment, which is semiconductors, and take this forward, because the next 10 years, 20 years will be all about your chip. So I believe India is chipping it at the right moment, although these steps happened in the past, but semiconductor is a very complex thing to scale. But now I believe things are happening in the right direction.
Tarun, there's this entire aspect of skilled labor, right? Which is required when you move, especially up the value chain and to more advanced components. And a lot of these components are supplied by Chinese suppliers and vendors who know how to deal with this technology. But we've seen that there were issues with visas when it came to bringing in Chinese suppliers to come to India to train Indian talent, right? So, how do you see that progressing? Where are the challenges really, and how do we tackle them?
Not exactly. Right now, there are two things. First thing is availability of the skilled labor around that particular facilities, right? So I think we are sorted on that. If you look at some of the areas in the south, especially that region in Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, you will find plenty of talent pool over there. This is not something new for us. We started way back in 2006-7 when Nokia opened their factory. India was the second biggest export of feature phones at that time, and we were doing much value addition at that time. So that availability of the skilled labor is there. But the second thing is the learning curve. So for example, when the entire SMT happened, you need a specialized SMT engineers on top of it, or workers who can run those lines. So for the parent company who is setting up a shop in India, obviously I'll have a certain pool of native engineers, which I will allot to that particular facility. The learning curve, technology transfer will happen, and then it will start independent on their own. This is how it works in the industry. The only hiccup here I can see is, like you said, some of the Chinese were not getting visas. Yes, that was an issue, and this needs to be taken care of. If you have a specialized skill set that are available in a certain country, it's no brainer. You need to take advantage of that. And similarly, there have been discussion. Some of these companies are open to send their engineers, and they are ready to do the technology transfer and help some of these factories to scale going forward.
Sure, and while I think they may not have manufacturing facilities the size they have in China, all of their design is centered out of Cupertino, right? So in that sense, do you think the real value addition comes in from design and that India should focus more on that?
Very important point. India is already focusing on design. In fact, 20% of the global design workforce here in India. So India is already exported. The only thing here is more than design is where intellectual property lies. I think that is where India needs to work. We need to create and have our own IP here in India. That is what we need. Manufacturing can be taken care of. If you go and ask China as an analyst, I also believe that China might not be interested in assembling anymore. If you look at it, they will be happy to outsource it to the countries like India or the others. You need to see where are the complex value chain, where the most value in the value chain. So if they have people who have outgrown or to that level, you need to think of how to localize the value chains accordingly. So the answer is yes, India can be both manufacturing and the design at the same time, but we do not need to continue to do it for others. We need to also create an IP here in India and see how we can create national champions like what Korea has done in the case of LG and Samsung. Can we create Tatas or the Reliance or the others of the world, and next 20, 30 years, they will be those semiconductor champions of the world? Who knows?
There's so much headroom for growth in India, something that Apple is well aware of. But India is not just a huge domestic market that the company is looking to tap. It's also a place where Apple sees potential when it comes to diversification. And this is an opportunity that India does not want to miss. As we see more established names like Foxconn and Tata Electronics investing more and building an ecosystem, it's likely that the smaller Indian players will join this complex web of suppliers and have a shot at being part of a GVC. With other specialized suppliers like Corning setting up a Gorilla Glass finishing facility, India is moving up the value chain, something that will bolster the country's image and attract more companies to set up their manufacturing base here. With the help of Indian giants like the Tatas, who can anchor companies and foster their own ecosystem, the entire electronics manufacturing segment is poised for tremendous growth. But while we double down on manufacturing, it's important for India not to lose sight of the equally large opportunity when it comes to design and IP creation, because that's where the party's at. Thank you, Ekta and Tarun. It's Friday, September 27th. I'm your host, Diya Rekhi, and you were listening to Apple Ripe for Picking, only on the Morning Brief from the Economic Times. This episode was produced by Neil Ghai and sound designed by Rajas Nayak. Executive producers Anirban Chaudhary and Arijit Burman. A new episode of the Morning Brief drops every Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday on a listening platform of your choice. Thank you for listening and have a great weekend.